The 1970s weren't just another decade. They were a world of their own. Bell-bottoms swayed on sidewalks, station wagons filled every driveway, and rock music poured from every speaker. It was colorful, messy, and unforgettable. What looked normal then feels almost impossible now. Life in the United States during the 70s carried a strange mix of calm and chaos. The 60s had left behind a spirit of rebellion, and yet the country was also settling into something more traditional. Families still gathered around television sets at night, flipping through just a handful of channels, while the evening news carried stories of change that felt both far away and right at the doorstep. Optimism filled the air, but it wasn't without shadows. People were eager to experiment, whether with fashion, music, or politics, but they also clung tightly to the comfort of routines. On a Saturday afternoon, main streets bustled with shoppers drifting in and out of small stores, many run by the same families for decades. Malls were beginning to appear on the edges of towns, luring people with larger parking lots and air-conditioned corridors. But the corner diner or five and dime still played a central role in daily life. A burger and fries shared at a Formica table, the jingle of a register, or the squeak of a revolving door carried a weight of familiarity. Television shaped family rhythms in new ways. Children hurried through homework to catch their favorite shows, and parents leaned on sitcoms and variety hours for comfort at the end of the day. It wasn't unusual for three generations to sit together, watching the same program, laughing at the same jokes. For the first time, television wasn't just entertainment. It was the heartbeat of the American living room. Yet for all its charm, the 70s had a wild edge. Kids rode bikes without helmets until the streetlights flickered on. Seatbelts often stayed tucked behind the seats. Families piled into cars for road trips, windows down, breathing in the steady rumble of the highway. There was freedom in those choices, but danger too, woven quietly into the fabric of daily life. Everyday details made the decades so distinct. The shag carpets that swallowed toys, the avocado green appliances in kitchens, and the constant soundtrack of AM radios gave the 70s a personality no other decade could claim. Even the air seemed different, thicker with smoke from cigarettes, exhaust from cars, and the strong scent of hairspray holding every feathered style in place. These were the textures of life, the things that don't always make the history books but shape memory all the same. It was a time when tradition lived side by side with rebellion, when the familiar was constantly brushing against the experimental. The 70s weren't perfect, but they carried an energy that made every moment feel alive. But to really understand the 70s, you have to look at the little things and the details that define daily life. Believe it or not, you could order a shotgun straight out of the Sears catalog. No license, no background check, not even a trip to the store. Just a few dollars, a slip in the mail, and a package would arrive at your doorstep containing a firearm. It sounds unthinkable now, but in the 1970s, it was considered perfectly normal. For many American families, the catalog was more than just shopping. It was a window into possibility. Flipping through the thick pages meant choosing between bicycles, radios, typewriters, and, yes, rifles. Teenagers could sit on the living room floor, circling their favorites with a pen, as casually as if they were pointing to a new baseball glove. Firearms were treated as household tools, no more unusual than a lawnmower or a set of kitchen knives. Guns slipped easily into everyday life. In rural communities, they were part of the rhythm of the land. Farmers kept them for hunting or protection, and young boys often received their first rifle as a rite of passage. Some families even wrapped them up in shiny paper and placed them under the Christmas tree. A new shotgun could be handed to a 14-year-old with the same excitement as a toy train set. Nobody blinked. It was simply part of the culture. This casual view of firearms reflected a deeper trust that shaped American life. Neighbors knew one another. Doors were left unlocked, and kids roamed freely without much supervision. Guns, in that context, were symbols of responsibility rather than danger. They represented independence, self-reliance, and a tradition passed from parent to child. Of course, it wasn't the same everywhere. In cities, the presence of firearms carried different weight, but even there the culture treated them with less suspicion than it does today. The idea that a catalog could offer revolvers and rifles alongside sewing machines didn't strike people as strange. It was just another page in the American story of the 70s. Looking back now, it's almost impossible to imagine. Today, strict regulations, background checks, and security measures dominate any conversation about firearms. The idea of handing a rifle to a teenager or mailing one to a suburban home feels reckless, even shocking. But half a century ago, it felt ordinary. It's a reminder of how much American culture has shifted, not only in law but in the way people think about risk, safety, and responsibility. The mail-order gun era wasn't without its consequences, but for those who lived through it, it remains one of the most striking details of the 1970s. It captures a time when trust outweighed fear, when danger seemed distant, and when a Sears catalog could bring both kitchen appliances and lethal weapons into the same household. But while you could buy weapons with ease, finding gas was another story. Gas lines wrapped around blocks, and sometimes you waited 3 hours just to be turned away. That was the reality of the 1970s oil crisis, when a simple trip to the pump became a test of patience and survival. The United States, so used to abundance, suddenly found itself paralyzed by shortages. Drivers who once filled their tanks without a second thought now faced a new kind of uncertainty. Would there be any fuel left when their turn finally came? The long lines became part of daily life. People packed lawn chairs, coolers, and radios into their cars, knowing the wait could last for hours. Kids sat in the back seat with comic books or played tag on the sidewalks while their parents guarded their place in line. It wasn't too unusual to see neighbors chatting between cars or strangers sharing snacks as the clock dragged on. In the middle of the chaos, small moments of camaraderie formed tiny islands of connection in an ocean of frustration. But the shortages also pushed tempers to the edge. Drivers cut in line and fights broke out. Arguments flared as people accused others of cheating the system. Police were sometimes called to gas stations just to keep order. The odd-even rule where license plates ending in odd numbers could buy gas on odd days, and even plates on even days, was meant to keep things fair, but it only added to the tension. The rules were simple, but they carried the sting of restriction in a country that prided itself on freedom. For many Americans, the gas crisis felt like a rude awakening. The nation that had once been unstoppable was suddenly vulnerable, its routines held hostage by something as basic as gasoline. The image of cars stretching down highways and around city blocks became a symbol of that vulnerability, a reminder that modern life was more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. Yet even in the frustration, there was a strange sense of togetherness. Entire communities were caught in the same struggle. People exchanged stories, offered tips about stations rumored to have fuel, and sometimes even pushed a neighbor's car forward when it ran out mid-line. There was anger, yes, but also resilience. It was as if the whole country, for a brief moment, was united in waiting. Looking back, the gas crisis was more than an inconvenience. It marked the beginning of a shift in how Americans thought about energy, consumption, and independence. It forced families to carpool, rethink vacations, and question whether endless driving was sustainable. And while the frustration has long since faded, the memory of those endless lines remains one of the most vivid details of the decade. And while cars waited in line for gas, one car in particular was hiding a deadly secret. It looked small, affordable, and stylish, but one tap to the back bumper could make it explode. The Ford Pinto was marketed as the perfect car for the times, compact, inexpensive, and made for the open roads of a new America. For a generation that wanted freedom without the high price tag, it seemed like the answer. Yet hidden beneath its sleek exterior was a design flaw so dangerous, it turned a symbol of independence into a rolling time bomb. The Pinto's gas tank was positioned just behind the rear bumper with almost no protection. In low-speed collisions, accidents that might otherwise leave little more than a dent, the tank could rupture. Fuel leaked. Sparks flew. Fires ignited. What should have been a minor fender bender could instantly become a deadly inferno. Families learned the hard way, and over 20 lives were lost in crashes where Pinto's fatal flaw turned survivable accidents into tragedies. What shocked people most wasn't only the danger, but the cover-up. Internal Ford memos later revealed that the company had calculated the cost of fixing the design flaw against the cost of potential lawsuits. In black and white, executives had decided it was cheaper to let people die than to redesign the car. That revelation shook America's faith in corporate responsibility. The Pinto wasn't just a car anymore. It was proof that profit had been placed above human life. Still, Pinto stayed on the road. Tens of thousands of Americans drove them every day, knowing or sometimes not knowing that danger lurked just inches from the rear bumper. For some, it was denial. For others, it was necessity. The Pinto was affordable, and in a decade of rising prices and gas shortages, affordability mattered. The fact that so many continued to rely on a car with such a reputation speaks volumes about the uneasy balance between risk and survival in the 1970s. The Pinto story became more than just a scandal. It was a turning point in the relationship between Americans and the corporations they trusted. For years, the public had assumed companies acted in their best interest. Pinto showed that wasn't always true. It planted seeds of skepticism that grew in the decades that followed. Profits over people became a phrase Americans could no longer ignore. Looking back, the Pinto is remembered less as a car and more as a cautionary tale. It captured the danger of cutting corners and the cost of misplaced trust. And for those who lived through it, the image of a small hatchback bursting into flames remains one of the darkest details of the 70s. And it wasn't just cars poisoning the decade, it was the fuel itself. Gas stations proudly advertised "contains lead," and we breathed it in every day. At the time, no one thought twice about it. Drivers rolled down their windows. Kids sat in the back seat with the wind in their hair, and the smell of gasoline filled the air like part of the soundtrack of daily life. What seemed harmless was, in truth, one of the most dangerous details of the 1970s. Leaded gasoline was everywhere. Nearly every car on the road relied on it, and every mile driven pumped toxic fumes into the atmosphere. The science was already raising red flags, with studies warning about the effects of lead exposure on the human body. But the oil and auto industries resisted the evidence. Lobbyists pushed back, insisting leaded fuel was safe, efficient, and essential for smooth-running engines. And so the fumes kept flowing, long after the risks were becoming harder to deny. Children were the most vulnerable. Lead entered their systems faster than adults, settling quietly into their bones and brains. Later research linked childhood exposure to lowered IQ, learning difficulties, hyperactivity, and even long-term behavioral issues. But in the 1970s, those warnings weren't widely understood. Parents simply buckled kids into cars or, more often, let them stand between the seats while exhaust drifted freely into the air they breathed. It was normalized as just part of life. Filling up at the pump meant smelling lead, touching it on the handle, sometimes even tracking it home on clothes. Gas stations displayed signs boasting high-octane contains lead, as though it were a selling point. To most Americans, it was. Engines purred more smoothly on it, and cars seemed to run better. Few asked what it was doing to their health. Looking back, the cultural ignorance feels unsettling. It wasn't willful neglect. Most people simply didn't know better. The danger was invisible, slow-moving, and easy to overlook when daily life was busy with work, family, and keeping the tank full. But beneath the surface, the damage was real, and its effects lingered for decades. The battle over leaded gasoline eventually became part of a broader environmental awakening. Concerns over air quality, toxic chemicals, and industrial shortcuts began to change how Americans thought about progress. The same decade that filled neighborhoods with fumes also gave rise to the first Earth Day, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and new conversations about responsibility. Out of the haze of exhaust came the first sparks of awareness that what was normal might also be deadly. It's hard now to imagine a world where toxic fuel was celebrated, where every breath carried invisible risks. Yet for millions of Americans in the 1970s, that was everyday life. And if the gas didn't get you, the smoke probably would. You could light up anywhere: restaurants, cars, even the doctor's office. Cigarettes weren't just accepted in the 1970s, they were expected. The glow of a lighter, the curl of smoke above a coffee cup, the soft tap of ashes into a tray, these were everyday rhythms of life. To walk into any public place was to walk into a haze, and nobody thought twice about it. At home, smoking was as natural as pouring a drink or flipping on the television. Parents lit up after dinner, while ashtrays sat ready on every table. Cigarette packs lived in shirt pockets, purses, and glove compartments, always within reach. In diners, waitresses carried fresh matches with the menus. In offices, smoke floated across meetings, mixing with the clatter of typewriters. It was a constant presence, so woven into the fabric of daily life that even children barely noticed it. But in cars, the smoke became unforgettable. Windows rolled up in the winter, a parent's hand on the wheel, and a steady trail of cigarette smoke filling the air. Kids coughed softly in the back seat or waved their hands to push it away, but nobody complained. That was just the way it was. The idea that secondhand smoke could harm children hadn't yet broken through. A long drive meant not only the hum of the engine, but also the smell of tobacco clinging to every fabric inside. Ashtrays were everywhere, built into cars, resting on desks, sitting at kitchen counters just as common as salt shakers. Some were decorative, with painted glass or chrome lids, gifts exchanged at holidays or brought back as souvenirs from trips. To own a home in the 1970s was to have at least one ashtray in every room, ready for guests who might reach for a pack the moment conversation began. The smoke lingered on everything. Coats smelled of it, curtains absorbed it, and books carried its scent between their pages. For many, those smells are still etched in memory, bringing back images of family gatherings, late-night talks, or quiet mornings at the kitchen table. It was a cultural acceptance of addiction that no one questioned. Smoking wasn't just common. It was glamorous, sociable, and almost universal. Looking back, nostalgia is complicated. The sight of a curled ribbon of smoke, the faint burn of tobacco in the air, can stir memories of youth, family, and moments long gone. Yet those same details also shock us today. What was once background noise is now seen as a danger, a health crisis disguised as a habit. The haze of the 1970s reminds us how quickly cultural norms can shift and how deeply they can shape memory. But the 70s weren't just about what filled the air. They were about what filled our stamp books. Every trip to the grocery store meant more stamps and more dreams to paste in the book. In the 1970s, the SNH Green Stamp program turned ordinary shopping into a small adventure. Cashiers handed out sheets of stamps with every purchase, little rectangles that held the promise of something bigger. Families tucked them into purses and pockets, knowing they weren't just stamps. They were the first step toward a reward waiting down the road. At home, the ritual began. A thick paper book sat in the kitchen drawer, already lined with rows of sticky squares. Children helped lick the stamps, pressing them carefully onto the pages, while parents counted how many books were filled and how many still needed more. The process was slow, sometimes frustrating, but always exciting. With each page completed, the picture of a toaster, blender, or new set of chairs in the catalog seemed a little closer. The catalog itself was a treasure chest. Families flipped through the glossy pages together, pointing out appliances or housewares they could buy with nothing more than stamps. It wasn't just about the item. It was about the patience, the teamwork, and the steady buildup of anticipation. Unlike today's instant purchases, rewards in the 1970s took time, and that waiting made them feel all the more valuable. Trips to redemption centers were their own kind of outing. Parents loaded children into station wagons, books of stamps tucked under arms, and drove to special stores where dreams could be exchanged for real items. Walking through aisles of goods, knowing each blender or lamp represented weeks of saving, gave the moment a weight far beyond the dollar value. It was shopping, but it was also a celebration. For children, the memories went deeper. Sitting at the table pasting stamps became a family event, a shared effort where everyone played a part. The glue stuck to fingers, the stamps curled at the edges, and laughter often filled the room. Looking back, those little green squares became symbols of something larger: patience, hope, and the joy of building something slowly together. Today, the idea feels almost foreign. With online shopping, two-day shipping, and instant gratification, the slow rhythm of saving and waiting has nearly vanished. Yet there was something grounding about the way stamps stretched out the reward. They taught families to savor the process, to imagine the future, and to enjoy the simple satisfaction of earning something bit by bit. For many who grew up in that era, the memory of green stamps isn't just about toasters or chairs. It's about a mother smiling as she closes a full book, a father carrying boxes out of a redemption store, and children pressing down one more crooked stamp with sticky fingers. Tiny squares of paper became tiny symbols of hope. And while families saved stamps, kids saved even more outrageous stickers that poked fun at grown-ups. Forget TikTok. Our rebellion came in the form of goofy stickers called Wacky Packages. In the 1970s, kids didn't need smartphones or apps to feel clever. All it took was a pack of parody stickers that turned the most ordinary brands into ridiculous jokes. For a few cents, you could buy a small escape from the world adults had built and a good laugh at their expense. The stickers looked like everyday products, but with a twist. Toothpaste became crust, bubblegum turned into Gaduka, and cereal boxes were splashed with names that poked fun at the advertising kids saw everywhere. To young eyes, it was mischievous genius. Adults spent years telling children to pay attention to brands, to trust labels, to beg for what they saw on TV. Wacky Packages turned all of that upside down. They gave kids a way to laugh at the very products that filled their homes. Trading them at school quickly became an obsession. At recess, lunch tables, and bus rides, stacks of stickers passed from hand to hand. Some kids praised them for the humor, others for the collecting. A few carefully saved the entire series in binders or boxes, while many simply plastered them on lunchboxes, bedroom doors, or school notebooks. Parents sighed as the stickers spread to furniture and walls, but for kids, that was the point. It wasn't just about the joke, it was about pushing boundaries. They were cheap enough that almost every kid could afford them, and that made the fun universal. For a dime, you got a handful of rebellion, a chance to laugh with friends, and a piece of a culture that belonged entirely to children. They were collectible, addictive, and just subversive enough to feel daring. Owning the newest sticker wasn't only a matter of fun, it was a kind of playground status. Looking back, Wacky Packages were more than just silly jokes. They were one of the earliest ways kids learned to question advertising and consumer culture. Without even realizing it, children were developing a small but powerful form of resistance to the nonstop messaging around them. They saw through the gloss and laughed at the slogans. In their own way, the stickers were teaching skepticism, hidden inside a laugh. Today, people who grew up in the 70s remember those stickers with fondness. They weren't sleek or digital, but they carried a spark of mischief that feels timeless. For many, the memory of peeling one off its backing and slapping it on a lunchbox still brings a smile. It was a childhood rebellion at its most innocent. A wink, a giggle, and a glue-back middle finger to the seriousness of the adult world. But if kids weren't trading stickers, they were dropping quarters into the newest obsession video games. From Pong to Donny Osmond's purple socks, the 70s were bursting with color, sound, and connection. The decade left behind more than news headlines and big events. It etched itself into daily life through the little things, the details that still live in memory. Arcades became the new hangouts. What started with the simple blip of Pong soon grew into the buzzing, flashing world of Space Invaders. Kids crowded into skating rinks, pizza shops, and neon-lit arcades, pockets full of quarters. The goal wasn't just to play, but to see your initials at the top of the leaderboard, glowing on the screen like a tiny badge of honor. Those early games didn't need realistic graphics. They needed only a challenge and a thrill, and they kept players hooked for hours. At the same time, families were flocking to Florida, where Walt Disney World opened in 1971. For many, walking down Main Street was like stepping into another world. The rides, the music, the colors, it wasn't just a theme park. It was a shared dream. Parents saved for years, packed cars with suitcases and kids, and made the long trip south. The heat, the crowds, even the exhaustion didn't matter. Disney was magic, and in the 70s, it was brand new. Television was changing too. In 1973, PBS aired An American Family, the first reality series of its kind. It didn't show scripted jokes or stage sets. It showed life as it was. Dinners, arguments, silence, and heartbreak. For the first time, viewers saw a family's struggles unfold in real time, including divorce and a son coming out as gay. It was raw and unsettling, but it made millions look at their own lives differently. Everywhere else, the 70s had a texture you could feel. Shag carpets swallowed bare feet and Legos alike, their bright oranges, greens, and yellows spreading across living rooms. People raked their carpets like lawns, fluffing them before company came. The fuzz didn't stop at the floor. Sideburns, mustaches, and long hair gave the whole decade a warm, untamed look. Even the furniture seemed padded, cushioned, and soft, echoing the comfort people craved. Even fitness carried its own quirks. Instead of gyms filled with weights, homes filled with vibrating belt machines, twist boards, and spring contraptions promising results without sweat. They buzzed and wobbled loudly, but people believed they were the future of exercise. Looking back, the fad feels almost silly, but it also speaks to the optimism of the time, faith that technology could make life easier, even in health. Fandom reached new heights, too. Teenagers swooned over Donny Osmond, waving purple ribbons and screaming at concerts when he walked out in his famous socks. Meanwhile, Jaws didn't just make people afraid of the ocean, it made sharks into a brand. Lunchboxes, board games, t-shirts, bubblegum, anything that could carry that iconic fin found its way into kids' hands. All of its games, parks, shows, carpets, fads, and fandom made the 1970s more than just a decade. It became a feeling, a collection of textures and sounds that shaped how a generation remembers its youth. We just revisited 15 details that made the 1970s unforgettable. Which one brought back memories for you? Share in the comments below.